Pardon the interruption. I am Sam Mulberry, and I am joined by...
I'm Annie Berglund in Seoul.
Annie, we are now actually into the course. Students have watched their first few documentary films. They've done their first museum. We're about halfway through the first unit. So we have some stuff to talk about. So what do you have for me?
Yeah, well, I want to hear your first couple impressions, Sam, about the paper assignments that the students turn in. Do you have any writing advice for students as they're beginning to turn in more of these writing assignments?
Absolutely. First thing I want to say, I really appreciate sort of the good, thoughtful writing. This really is a course where when you're doing those essays, like personal interaction's a big piece of it. We often will say in the questions, where do you stand on this issue, or what do you think about this thing that you're writing about? And we really do mean that. I want to see your interaction with that. So I want to thank you for some good, thoughtful writing there. I basically have 3 pieces of advice to make your essays even stronger. First one, read the question carefully. Make sure you really understand what the question's getting at. You understand the different parts. There's often like multiple questions embedded in one of those questions. So read the question carefully to make sure you're answering every part and that you're kind of on theme in terms of what the question is asking. Second thing, this is a big one, and this is going to be big not only for these writing assignments, but also as we're working on the exam, is use specific details, especially specific quotes, especially on these kind of essays that are attached to readings in the films. I think it's often helpful to look at the question, find a quote from the reading that really addresses what that question's getting at, and maybe even put that really early in your essay. Throw the quote out there, and then kind of break the quote down, or talk through what the author is saying in the quote, what they mean by that. That's a good way to approach these. It's a way to make sure you're using good details. You're really interacting with the reading because you're putting the answers, at least in part, in the actual voice of the authors that we're talking about. Then the third thing I would say is proofread. I noticed on a couple of them, it felt like you were kind of banging out the answer to this, and you click submit. And as I read them, I thought, you would have been well served to just read this one more time. Make sure it makes sense. Make sure grammatically you're writing in complete sentences. What you're saying actually is coming through. One tip I would have for proofreading that I think is helpful is read it out loud to yourself, because sometimes when you're reading it out loud, you hear things that when you're reading just sort of in the voice in your head, you miss. So I think doing those 3 things will make your essays even stronger. Annie, students have visited their first museum, the Kevin Craig Museum of the Ancient World. What is your favorite exhibit in this first museum?
Man, I mean, other than just the reference to and dedication to Kevin Craig, I took Roman, is it Roman Civilization? That was yes, that was the title of the course. I took that when I was a student at Bethel. And it was one of those like required courses for history majors, like a capstone or a required course. And I remember going into the class and thinking like, I don't know that much about the ancient world. And it's hard for me to empathize kind of with something so far away and so different from myself. And something that I loved about Kevin Craig and about this museum is that it's not just about the Roman Republic, but it's about how we bridge the Roman Republic with our more contemporary history. So for me, when I was a student at Bethel, I studied, many of my classes were on American history and American civilization. So it's really fun to go through, especially those rooms and those artifacts in the museum and see like, oh, this statue of George Washington like looks a lot more like a Roman ruler than it does an American war hero, right? Like to see part of the Roman civilization embodied in more contemporary history, especially in our own context in the US, is exciting. Like looking at Madison's Federalist Papers and knowing that that is a product of the Roman Republic from centuries before is really exciting for me. So those are kind of where my interests were when I was looking through the museum. But Sam, what advice do you have for students as they're visiting the museums? What kind of things should they be looking for, or is there anything that they should note?
Yeah, I would say that my first piece of advice is make sure you take your time. Now that you've been through one of these, you see that there's a ton of content in there, and it's kind of hard to zip through them. So start early and take your time would be my first piece of advice. And you can approach this. I was actually just in Germany last week. We went to lots of museums, and when I go to a real physical museum, I often, before I dig deep into okay, I'm going to start reading all this stuff or really digging into what's in the museum, I like to get a lay of the land to know well, what is going to be in this museum. So maybe when you first step in, click on the map right away and look at the map and read the titles to each room to see okay, here's the things we're going to be talking about. Here's the topics. Second thing I would say is before you start the museum, open up the assignment sheet in Moodle as well and read every question you're going to have to answer, because sometimes it's helpful to know, okay, I know in a grand sweep what I'm going to be looking for and looking at, because some of those questions are more summary questions, so you can be thinking about them from the very beginning, and then when you go in to write them, you've already had that question in mind. So I think it's really important to focus in on those questions for the writing assignment, but the flip side of that is to also make sure to connect what we're talking about in the museum to the reading packet. So, where do we talk about people in the museum that we're also reading from in the reading packet? Because the museum will flesh that person out a little bit more, give you a little bit more context for the readings that you're doing, but also connect it to the study guide. Think about the museums not just as a means to completing the assignment for that day, but it's also like a reference text. It's like a textbook to help you fill out your vocab terms. So as I was going through the museum, I would have my vocab terms with me, and whenever I found a person on my vocab list or an event on my vocab list that also appears in the museum, I would take the time to go in and fill out that vocab term, the who, what, where, when, significance, just like we talked about in the first webisode. That's going to save you a lot of time as you start to get closer to the first exam, because you're going to be creating notes, creating tools that are going to help you for that first exam. So Annie, speaking of the first exam, our first exam is Tuesday, June 28th. How should students best prepare for mastery terms on the first exam?
Man, there's so many methods for preparing, and I think it really depends on what the individual student's needs are. For me, I know it was helpful when I was a student, and even as I'm in graduate school or later on, it's helpful for me to talk things through. So oftentimes I'll tell students yeah, if you got note cards, great. Take those note cards and maybe just randomly draw one or two and see how long you can talk about that individual or that event or that mastery term, and see, if you can say the who, what, the when, and the where, excellent. If you realize that the significance is an area where you can't really talk much on it, then that's what you should target as you're trying to prepare, as you're focusing on these mastery terms. So it really does help you to realize as I quiz myself, it seems like I don't know the geography. I think I need to focus on where things are happening, or the timeline's a little bit fuzzy. Maybe I should reorganize my note cards so that, those that are occurring in similar time periods are all together, and I can focus on that and then move on. And you can kind of see, okay, geographically or timeline wise, where are my issues. I also tell students, I think we maybe mentioned this before, that when you are making note cards, if that's the way you want to study, that's great, but there's a couple cautionary tales, right? So you can find a lot of note cards online, actually. Students will find Quizlets or other resources available online, and while those are really good starting places, oftentimes they can have mistakes, or they can be out of from semesters, I almost said centuries back. Wow. From semesters back, when we catered the course in a different direction. So you might find information that's either wrong because it's made by a student and not by a professor, and maybe the student was rushed or just didn't know the material. Or you can find information that's no longer even relevant. So if you're going to use Quizlet, certainly use it, but think of it like Wikipedia, where it's okay, this is a place I could kind of start. But what I really need to be focusing on course material that's provided to me to really flesh out and provide nuance and detail. Like Sam was saying at the start, one of the most important things in your writing assignments or in your tests is to include those details. You don't want to have a 2-sentence summary that's vague and out of context. You want to be able to supply your professor with enough information for them to know that you truly understand those people or events. Another thing, one more quick thing with the significances for your mastery terms, make sure that you have, maybe 2 a minimum, if not 3 or 4 different significances. So if it feels like the significances on your note cards or wherever you're doing your notes are kind of just saying the same thing over and over again, try to really come up with something distinct and different. At the same time, you want to make sure that those significances are catered towards the class. So you don't want, it's okay to say, so-and-so is significant for A, B, and C, but if A, B, and C don't really connect to the course themes, they might be true, but they're not really relevant for CWC. So for example, Martin Luther King Jr. clearly is important in many significances, but try to find the ways that he is specifically speaking to themes of injustice in the class or themes of other types of big important kind of values in American life or in Western civilization. So again, just making sure that you're marrying those individuals with the big questions of CWC, or like, who am I? Who am I in relationship to others? What is it like for the Christian experience in these different contexts? So I think that's mostly what I tell students. Also, make sure you're incorporating readings. If any of those mastery terms have a reading connected to them, you should definitely include that in your significance. But as students prepare for the exam, which again, Tuesday, June 28th, how can you best prepare, Sam, for the exam essay?
Yeah, so if you look at the exam, the study guide, we give you beneath the vocab lists of essay question themes. Now, these are not the exact essays we might give you on the exam, but this should give you some direction. I think often the essays will take one or take 2 of those themes and sort of combine them into a particular essay question. So some things to think about with this exam. It's timed. You're gonna have a limited amount of time, but it is open note and open book. So if I was preparing to take an open note, open book test, and I was looking at those essay themes, I know I'm going to write a stronger essay if I go through those themes and do a little bit of work ahead of time. So what I might do is create a little outline and say, okay, if I was going to answer this question. So for example, the first essay question theme has to do with how the ancient world sort of creates the culture into which Christ is born. So I might go through and sort of outline, what are the different cultures that we looked at. So looking specifically at Greek culture, Roman culture, and Jewish culture, and say, okay, what elements of those things create the world into which Christ is born? And then what I would do is go through and connect as many terms and readings to each one of those things. What are Greek readings or terms that directly impact the world into which Christ is born? What are Roman terms and readings that directly impact that? What are Jewish terms and readings that directly impact that? So then I sort of have a sense of like, now I know what things I can go to, because we keep talking about, a strong essay, strong writing is going to draw on those things. Well, you can already start to organize that. And then I would say when you get to the exam, since the exam isn't going to be those exact questions, but in those directions, again, make sure you read the questions very carefully. I will see very often when I grade, I will see people who start to write a good essay in the direction that the question's going, but there's whole chunks of the question they don't address. And that really hurts students when it comes to their grade on that essay question. So make sure you're looking at the whole question. You're saying, here are the 3 sub questions within this. I'm going to make sure I answer all of that. So that's what I would be doing now. I also would not wait until the day before the exam to start working on those things. I would say today would be a great day to say, let's look at the essay themes we've covered so far and start to outline those things. Annie, that's all the time we have for this first segment. We're going to be back in segment 2 to dig into some of this ancient world content and maybe have a little debate between you and I about kind of what some of the most significant ideas are in what we've covered so far in the course. We'll be right back. Welcome back. What we're going to do now is play a little game we like to call Make the Case. We argue, you vote. So we have 3 questions surrounding what we've covered so far in this course. And I have here sets of envelopes. So what we're going to do is we're going to read the question. Then we're going to randomly select which side you and I each need to debate. We're going to make our case for why we think our answer is right. And then up on Moodle, we'll have a poll for you to go in and vote and for you to say who you think won that debate. Annie, what is the first question we have?
In Sophocles' play Antigone, who is right, Antigone or Creon?
All right, so I have 2 potential answers here. We'll say, let's have Antigone go first, okay? Which do you want, my left hand or my right hand?
Left hand.
All right,
I'm so scared.
You're going to take the left hand, so let's open this up and see what we got here. So you have Creon.
Ooh, okay.
All right. So
I
will be arguing that Antigone's right, and I will kick this off. So the play Antigone is a play about questions about justice, which is a theme we've been talking about a lot in this course. We talked about it with Martin Luther King. We're talking about it now when we're, as we're thinking about the play Antigone, right? So Antigone buries her brother. Her brother who fought in a war against another one of her brothers, one brother defending the city, the other brother attacking the city. And she buries both of her brothers, even though Creon, the king of the city, the legitimate secular political authority of the city, says it is illegal to bury the brother Polynices who was attacking the city. He says he's a traitor to the city. And Antigone decides she's going to bury her brother. Now, what makes her right here is that she has a very clear, I would argue more so than Creon, has a clear definition of justice that she articulates. She is looking to the law, right? The law is Creon, and Creon says it's illegal to bury your brother, but then she's looking to her responsibilities. Think about these big CWC questions. Who am I in relationship to others? What responsibilities do I have towards others? And she says that Polynices is also my brother, and as a sister to my brother, my parents are dead. My sister, she talks to as Meanie at the beginning of this, says she's not going to participate in this, so she sees herself as the only family member left to bury her brother, right? So it's her responsibility that way. But more importantly, if you read this play carefully, she appeals to what she calls the unwritten and eternal law of the gods. She says the gods demand burial of the dead. In ancient Greek society, if you don't give proper burial rites, then the soul of that person is not allowed to pass on to the afterlife. So their soul just wanders the earth. So she says the gods demand proper burial rites. She says Zeus demands it. So she's appealing to a higher law. She says, yes, Creon has passed this law, but she says Creon is basically a secular leader, right? He is not his political authority does not supersede the unwritten law of the gods. So she's basically appealing to a higher power. She says, I have a responsibility to my family, but I have a responsibility to my gods to do what they say. And she says, no human being has the authority to overrule the law of the gods. So she's giving us a definition of justice. What is just, what is right, what is good to her is to follow the eternal law of the gods. Now, what she's echoing there, or I should say what is echoed there going forward, is what we see in Martin Luther King Jr., right? King says, why are segregation laws unjust? Because obviously they're made by a just authority, right? I shouldn't say just, by a legitimate authority, right? The government is a legitimate secular authority, but he says they offend the unwritten moral law of God. Antigone's making that same argument. I think it's hard to argue against the unwritten eternal moral law of God. And Annie, that is your job. Tell me why Creon is right and Antigone is wrong.
Oh, you're telling me to argue against God. That is what a setup that was. Okay, so I agree with you that Antigone, I think it's the easier one to side with in this argument, right? Because we see her as like a symbol of justice, of civil disobedience, like you said, tying her in with MLK Jr. Obviously, the right to peaceably assemble, the right to like state our opinions, to fight for freedoms in our country is really important, and to civilly disobey against laws that we think are unjust. Like that is a bedrock to American life. But at the same time, while that's important to us here in the 21st century, I think we need to go back and really focus on the context of this play, which, as you said, like it happens in this fictional city of Thebes. As we know, Athens, or Greece, ancient Greece, is a bunch of polis, and they are, and we have like the Athenian democracy, right? But Thebes itself is a monarchy. And it's really meant to kind of reflect back on the ancient Greek values and say like, oh, these things that are going wrong in Thebes, there's many reasons why they're going wrong, but part of it is because of it being a monarchy. Part of it is because you have people who are acting in ways that are contrary to what Greeks in the audience would think is right. And so here we have Creon, who I think is embodying a very Greek ideal. So Creon is saying, okay, we have these two brothers. They were kings, right? Right before he takes the throne. We have Polynices and Eteocles. Polynices starts this war, kills Eteocles, and it's all over transferring power, right? It's all over the fact that one doesn't want to give up the throne to the other. And what you have here is not only the start of a civil war, but you have literally brother versus brother. You have like people murdering flesh and blood. Like it is one of the most violent types of wars, right? Wars in your own land against your own people. And so as a king, he enters this position and he comes out of a civil war. So what is he going to say? He's going to try to stop anyone else from going to war again. And so he comes up with this law that, granted, is seen as outside of his jurisdiction, but he says, I will not honor in death somebody who pitted brother against brother and sister against sister in my city. And I'm not going to let citizens of Thebes decide when they can just take up arms against each other, right? Like, so one of the big values that he's embodying is the value of the state, the value of the community. And so he's saying, you know, like if I'm going to be a good ruler, one that steers this ship to safety, I need to make sure that everything is in line, right? Like I am the leader here and we can't have people trying to turn it any other way, right? And so like Polynices could have been upset. Like it's legitimate for him to be upset that he didn't receive the throne, but to start a civil war over it is an extreme, right? And so Creon is, in fact, responding to somebody else's extreme decision. So we can say, oh, he wasn't acting moderately, but really, like, it's all in a response, a snowball effect. But one of the bigger things, other than just the importance of the state in Greek life as one of the biggest values for how anything can function, is that we are all a part of a community, is the idea of moderacy. And so if we think about Antigone, she seems like a great hero to us in the 21st century, but we need to think of her as the ancient Greek audience would have. And they would have sat in their seats, and I believe they would have watched this play and felt deeply uncomfortable and disturbed by what she was doing. So to us, she seems heroic. Like we love that narrative of somebody like pushing back against, you know, like an underdog pushing back against these authorities above them that they don't agree with. But to Greeks, no, that is not what you do. That is both immoderate and that is opposing the state. And so they would have seen her as this 14, probably 15-year-old girl, a woman, right? Defying male authority, a citizen defying political authority, and they would have said that that was acting immoderate, so they would have seen her at fault as well. It's not only Creon who was acting in extremes, it was also Antigone. So my argument, I suppose, is that to the original audience of ancient Greeks, they would have looked at Creon's decision-making with much more grace than a 21st century lens.
I love that answer, right? It's an American reading versus a ancient Greek reading of this play. Annie, speaking of ancient Greece, number 2, what is the better form of government, Athenian democracy or the Roman Republic? Well, let's do this chronologically. So whoever gets Athens goes first. Which do you want?
Oh man. Wait, I choose?
You got to, well, no, which of these envelopes, left or right, do you want?
Okay. I'll do the right envelope.
All right. You're going with my right hand.
Yes.
All right. Let's see what we have here for you.
I'm sorry, I had an internal panic. Who is starting?
Whoever gets Greece is starting.
Okay, Greece is starting.
You get the Roman Republic. So I go first again. All right. So why is Athenian democracy better than the Roman Republic? Why is it a better form of government? And I will say this, just like last time, you thought that I had the easy one. I actually think I have the hard one this time. I think that the Roman Republic has some advantages to it. But Athenian democracy, I think, has, at least in its ideals, has a really powerful model that we can look to, and in some ways maybe a more just model. Now, I think I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say this for both of us. These are both systems that are, when we're talking about citizenship and rights, we're talking about males, right? So like, that's even in terms of that. These are both slaveholding societies. That's even in terms of that. So more we're thinking about, what I think, what is a better model? What is a more just model? And the thing about Athenian democracy that I am really moved by is that it really is built to give everyone who is a citizen, a voice. It is a direct democracy. So you don't elect officials who rule in your stead. In the U.S., we're a democratic society, but we're a republic, right? We elect it's a representative democracy. We elect officials to represent us. In Athens, that's not it. It's you have a voice. You have a voice and you have a vote if you're a citizen, and it's built around. So I think that's one thing that I think is a real value better than the Roman Republic is that it breaks down some of those things about class, some of those things about wealth and status and those types of things, which are issues in the Roman Republic, to be perfectly honest, that those things aren't there. Another thing that Athenian democracy does that the Romans don't do is that Athenian democracy doesn't really have elections. People aren't elected. Their positions of import are largely drawn by lot, right? So like if you're going to be a judge, you don't try to win, sway, and influence so you can become a judge or a member of a jury. Those are selected at random by drawing lots. Same with all kinds of other government officials. So there is this kind of equity to that. Now I can see the wheels turning in your head of what might be a problem with that, but I do think, again, talking in the ideal, I think that's a big piece of it. Now a third thing, which we can debate whether this is good or bad, is that Athenian democracy is built to be small. It's built to run a polis. It's built to run a city. It doesn't actually work if you try to turn it into a grand, expansive empire, right? Now, I happen to think maybe we shouldn't have grand, expansive empires. So I think Athenian democracy is kind of great. It really is focused on the local in that way. So I think power in the hands of the people, direct democracy, direct vote, on all topics, this kind of openness that we see in the Pericles reading. He says, like, if you're a foreigner and you want to come watch us debate things in the Pnyx, come do it. Like, this isn't happening behind closed doors in smoke-filled rooms. This is a public thing, and people will rise because of their merit. And in reality, that actually does happen in Athens. So that's my case for Athenian democracy, small, local, direct democracy. Annie, why is the Roman Republic better?
Man, I like what you had to say, especially as somebody who like finds civic participation to be so important, and to know that that comes from this legacy of Athenian democracy of saying like it is our duty as citizens to go and to have like share our opinions on laws, on policies. Like I think that's a wonderful aspect of Athenian democracy. However, I am going to argue for Roman Republic. So here's why. The Roman Republic, just like Athenian democracy, it made its own thing, right? It made its own version of a popular government, but this one is a republic. And so there's some really important differences that you already highlighted, that endured for centuries, just like Athenian democracy. I think in many ways, the Roman Republic is a better model for American style governance than Athenian democracy, and there's a couple reasons for that. I think it's more in line with what our founding fathers had in mind, and one thing that you mentioned was size, right? And so if we think about direct participation, I think that's a wonderful ideal. You said ideal, right? Like I think that's idealistic. I think it's not very practical on a larger scale, right? Like right now, I'm living in a small country. South Korea is smaller than Minnesota. And democracy plays out super differently here, right? You have elections with 12, 13, 14 presidential candidates running, like multi-party system. Everyone gets the day off to go vote on national elections or on like provincial elections. So it's different because it's smaller. But a lot of really big countries are also popular governments in the 21st century, and they cannot function in that way when you have so many people. And when your land at the time of the Roman Republic is often changing and moving and growing, right? So if we think about the context of the Roman Republic, it's huge, right? And especially towards the end, when it switches over into the empire, they have most of the Mediterranean under their control, and they continue to conquer, and yes, brutally conquer, but conquer more and more land and peoples. And so you need to find a way to account for this diversity across your huge empire. Now, I'm not saying we need empires here in the 21st century, but because we have big areas with big populations, I think that though I am somebody who personally believes that the democratic side, like moving towards democracy, direct democracy is always important and always good, I can see why it's not always practical, right? And you need to have governing bodies, whether it's state level or more local levels, that are representing people, because not everybody can be, not everyone can have the time and the space and the money now, or in the Roman Republic, in such a huge republic, to know about everything, to make a good decision about every law and every policy in the land. So I think it's more practical. I think it has some also really important legacies that stand out. Things like checks and balances. We see a lot of like the different branches of the US government, its legacy is in the Roman Republic. And with elections, we also have things like campaigning, like every part of really like American political system is like built on this. And when Rome conquered, just like Athens conquered, we see Rome really embracing and allowing diversity, which is an important difference, I think. We see conquering, it's brutal, it's horrific. At the same time, there is a level of tolerance. There is this idea of like, oh, we can actually like take and use Greek ideas, like when we're taking over this previous Greek empire. And there's even an expansion of citizenship to a lot of the people that they're taking over, right? And so that's a really big difference when we highlight that with perhaps the Pericles reading and seeing the island of Milos is just, they're given a choice, but it's a non-choice. Either you're with us or we conquer you. So either way, they're going to be destroyed. Their ways of life will be destroyed, and they will not be made citizens, right? And so it is vastly different in terms of how you approach the new people coming into your empire? What do you do with them? So I think maintaining a large state, it requires representation. And the Roman Republic is a really good model of that, as well as some of those other things with citizenship and checks and balances.
Fantastic. Let's get philosophical for our last question. Who is the more important philosopher for Christians to wrestle with, Plato or Aristotle? Annie, which envelope do you want?
We'll do this first?
We'll do Plato first. We'll do this chronologically as well.
Okay. Left.
All right. You're going to take the left.
Yeah.
Let's see what we got here. So Annie, you will be speaking on behalf of, if I can get this envelope open, you will be speaking on behalf of Plato. So you go first.
My boy Plato. Okay, so Plato, I think he's incredibly important for Christians in the past and Christians today in the 21st century of understanding scripture, right? So Plato, if we think to the basics of Plato, how do you find truth? You don't start with the world like Aristotle, because in fact, he's concerned with the idea that there is a physical world, there's a physical realm, and then there's an eternal realm, a realm of ideas, right? And so we see this dualism present, this Platonic dualism, right? You have the physical world, you have the eternal world. The physical world he describes as being unreliable. It really doesn't give us the whole picture of how things are. And instead, we should be looking towards this eternal realm, right? And so, and it's not even that it's unreliable, but that the physical world is quite flawed, where good is found in the eternal world. And that distinction is found in scripture time and time again. It's found from the pulpit. Like as you sit and you listen to pastors in the 21st century, that kind of distinction is just, it's there. Like we don't even think about it because it's so ingrained in how we understand Christianity, right? That there's the sin of the world, and then there is the eternal good, the eternal, like we have God who washes away our sins. So I want to be careful and say Plato never used the word sin, right? Plato didn't use that. But his ideas about the physical world, about nature as something that is, perhaps flawed and unreliable, especially in regards to the eternal truths, that's seen in our understandings of Christianity. Another important point is if we're thinking about his ideas about the good life. What is the good life? We have his tripartite soul. And so the soul to the ancient Greeks is like all of us. It's like all of our beings. And humans are guided in these different, in our actions by three parts of the soul. And one part of the soul is the appetites. And the appetites is like our physical needs and our desires. And the physical needs and desires can oftentimes lead us astray, right? It can really, if we let those be the things that decide to make our actions, our choices come true, and we rely less on the spirit or the mind, and we get this imbalance, it can cause immoderacy. It can cause us to go to extremes. And so we can also think about that in terms of sin too. Again, Plato didn't say sin, but the appetites, physical needs, physical desires, like that is how we might view sinful nature, right? That we want these things that are temporary, that maybe aren't even good for us. And if we don't put them in check, using our spirit, using our emotional response or our rational calculations, which are God-given, it can lead us astray. It can lead us down a path of sinfulness, right? And so I think that really, though, in the end, kind of the third and final thing is that Platonic dualism is literally what you need to understand theology. Like the theology of the New Testament is written in Platonic dualism. And you have like Paul's letters. You see these distinctions of spirit and flesh time and time again. In the Gospels, talking about who Jesus is, the Word becoming flesh, and like spirit coming into this unreliable, flawed realm, and being a perfect being within it. And so the huge connection, I think, is there, and kind of between the physical world and then the eternal truth, the eternal realms. Sam, how about Aristotle? I love Aristotle too.
All right. So it was really interesting to hear you describe this. I mean, basically the case you make, which is very true, is that so much of our understanding of Christianity, and even a biblical understanding of Christianity, is seen through the lens of Plato. We talked in segment 1 about, what are the things that create the world in which Christ is born. Platonic philosophy is a big piece of it. So there is this huge sense that Christianity is viewed through this Platonic lens. And we're going to talk in the second half of this unit about why that is. We're going to talk about people like especially Augustine of Hippo, who's going to bring Platonism into Christianity and Christian theology in lots and lots of ways. So the question is, which of these philosophers should Christians really wrestle with? And I actually think it's Aristotle because of everything you just said, because Christianity and Platonism seem to mesh so much that it creates potential problems. Here's what I mean by that. So you talked a lot about dualism, right? About the spirit is good, the flesh is evil, right? Now, again, that's not in, I mean, we can read that in the Bible, but we can also go way too far with that, because if I'm reading the Bible, Annie, you can help me out with this, because I think you're pretty well steeped in the Bible. First thing that happens in the Bible is what happens first? Very beginning of the Bible, creation, right? And does God just create the spiritual world and the physical world's a mistake?
No,
God creates
nature.
He creates nature. He creates the physical world. Now we see the fall, but we still see that the story of Scripture is in part about God's redemption of His creation, right? So,
and creation is good. Nature is good.
Exactly. So Aristotle is saying he's not denying the sort of Platonic forms and these sort of non-physical realities, but he says there is truth to be found in the physical world. There's good to be found in the physical world. Christianity gets into trouble if they deny the physical reality of God's creation too much. We're going to talk in the second half of this unit about a heresy called Gnosticism, which are early Christians who take Plato kind of too hard, and they totally deny the physical and say it's only about the spiritual. And that's actually declared a heresy by the church. If you read First John, it is all about denying Gnosticism. It says like if somebody comes to you and says, that the flesh is evil, that Christ doesn't come in flesh and blood and water, he's like, that person is from the evil one, right? It's like the physical reality of Christ. You even said the word that this is a story about this spiritual God becoming flesh, taking on flesh. So God Himself does not deny the flesh, right? So all that is to say, Aristotle is a good corrective, I think, to maybe the over-Platonizing of Christianity. So actually there is this physical reality. Think about Christ at the Last Supper, right? This is my body, take and eat, right? That is a physical representation of our relationship with Christ. So I think that that's a really, really big piece of it. Now, another piece of this is when we look at Aristotle's ethics. Aristotle's ethics is all about saying, when we think about the good and becoming good, it's not enough for it to exist here, right? He says virtue comes not just in knowing what virtues are, but virtue comes through habituation. It comes through acting virtuously. If you want to be generous, you need to understand that generosity exists in the mean between these extremes of sort of being miserly and being kind of foolish with what you have and just, giving everything away. He says, what we need is a moderate position, but it's not enough to know moderation. What we need to do is we need to act moderately. We need to act generously. We need to act courageously. So actions is about what we do in this world, that's how we are becoming what we are, the not just who we are, but who we're supposed to be. And I think that's a huge, we're going to see that tension exist throughout this course as people are defining Christianity. How much of Christianity is about the things that I believe, the ideas that I assent to, and how much of it is about practice, who I am, how I live, right? How do we know that someone is a Christian? Do we know it because of what they believe, or do we know they are Christians because of their love and the way that they actively love in this world? I'm not saying Aristotle is saying that, but I think Aristotle is someone Christians should wrestle with to say, have we become too Platonic? So these are all tensions we're going to see start to come about in the second half of this unit. So remember Plato and Aristotle. They're going to keep circling back. Students, if you go on to Moodle, right beneath this webisode, we'll have a link for you to vote on each one of these debates and who you think made the better case. Annie and I will have an ongoing competition throughout this course as we're playing some of these games. But now it's your turn. So what I want you to do is right below that on Moodle, you'll find another video forum. And what I want you to do is to create a Poodle video where you make the case. And here is the question for you. Of all the people you've encountered so far in the ancient world, so this pre-Christian world we've talked about, so you can't talk about MLK because although we've talked about him, he's not part of the ancient world. So from all the people we've encountered so far in the ancient world, from museums, readings, films, webisode, which two do you think have the most to teach 21st century Christians? So which two ancients do you think have the most to teach 21st century Christians? So go on to Poodle, or go on to the discussion forum, post a Poodle video where you make the case yourself. So these should be, I would say around 4 or 5 minutes long. Really make the case, really talk about who the people are, what they did, what they thought, and especially make sure to hit what they have to teach us as 21st century Christians. I know when we did our first Poodle post, there were a couple people who had issues having their videos upload. So if I get those issues, I'll email you back to just say, can you try to post the video again? Or can you instead upload the video maybe to like an unlisted YouTube link and just post that link in there? Because I need to be able to actually see what you have to say. So that will be due tomorrow by 10 a.m. Go on and post that. Annie, we are almost done. This is all the time we have for this segment. We'll be back in just a few seconds to wrap up the show.
Welcome back. It's happy time on June 20th. Happy birthday to Errol Flynn. The Golden Age Hollywood leading man was born on this date in 1909. Flynn is perhaps most famous for portraying the titular hero of the 1938 film, The Adventures of Robin Hood. Sam, which is your favorite cinematic portrayal of the 12th century English folk hero, Robin Hood?
To me, this is very, very easy. As a little kid, I loved Robin Hood. I loved it's no doubt I became a historian. I loved medieval stories, but Robin Hood was one of my favorite. But the best cinematic depiction of Robin Hood, and there are a lot of them, is by far the 1973 Disney animated Robin Hood. Robin Hood he's a fox, and he's played by Brian Bedford. It's my favorite Disney animated movie, and there's a lot to choose from, and I know you all have your favorites. Disney's Robin Hood is my absolute favorite. There is no character that's cooler, more dashing and charismatic, and just sort of moves easily through the world. If you haven't seen Disney's Robin Hood, it's on Disney Plus. Go watch it. Phenomenal.
He is a fox.
That's right, in all ways. Annie, happy anniversary to Jaws, one of my favorite films. This film was released on this day in 1975 and became the highest grossing film up to that point in time and started the trend of the idea of a summer blockbuster film. Annie, what is your favorite summer blockbuster from your childhood?
Okay, I'm gonna set the scene. It's 2003. I'm 12 years old, summertime. Keira Knightley is 18 years old. Johnny Depp hasn't become Willy Wonka yet, or the Mad Hatter, or Dumbledore. Orlando Bloom hasn't had children. I don't know what else he's done after this movie. But Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl, took my life by storm. It was like every sleepover that summer and the subsequent summer was we're going to watch Pirates of the Caribbean and eat ice cream. And we did it every time. It didn't matter which friends you were with, if you were with family, everyone's watching Pirates of the Caribbean. So that's probably the biggest blockbuster from my childhood that I remember. So happy trails, Sam, to sunlight. Tomorrow is the longest day of the year, which means our days will get progressively shorter from today until December 21st. What is the ideal time for sunset?
Well, Annie, as people may or may not know, I am a very early morning person, so I tend to go to bed early. So actually, I think sunset, I'm good with sunset at 8 p.m. And it's even in the summer, because here's the thing. If sunset was at 8 p.m. And when I say sunset, I mean at 8 p.m. lights out, it's dark. Is like, you know what's great in summer is when it's warm and dark outside. It's kind of awesome, right? You can have a campfire, but you don't have to stay up forever for that. Like you can play, when you're a kid, you can play night games with flashlights running around. Like there's all kinds of fun stuff you can do. So I actually think in the summer it stays light too late. I would be happy to switch the clocks so it was dark by 8 and just got light early in the morning, because I'm up then anyhow. So I might as well. I like sunlight in the morning. And I want an early sunset. I know that's an unacceptable answer, but that's my answer, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. I am the opposite.
All right. Well, students, that is all the time that we have. So let's just go to the big finish. Remember, post your poodle videos about the 2 ancients that you think have the most to teach 21st century Christians. That is due by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Go on and vote for who won each round of Make the Case. Please email me, s-mulberry@bethel.edu, if you have questions about the course, about course content. If you want to set up a Zoom meeting because you want to talk about things, I'm happy to meet with you. I'm happy to help. That is all the time that we have. We will be back a week from now for our next webisode, which will be a day before your first exam, which is Tuesday, June 28th. Say goodnight, Stacy.